Welcome back, everyone, to Coffee and UFOs, two of my favorite things. I have a special guest tonight. His name is Ted Peters. He is a theologian, and we'll be discussing the metaphysical relationship to UFOs and the secular take on that, the intersection of all those conversations, whether UFOs are a symbol, uh, something of our archetypal consciousness, are they something literal? And if so, how do we integrate with such a phenomena if direct contact were to be made? Ted Peters, I'm very excited to have on because he was literally the first podcast interview guest I'd ever had when I was doing Epic Voyages Radio as a guest host myself many years ago. So it's always an honor to have him back on. We'll get to Ted in just a moment. As a friendly reminder, this podcast, Coffee and UFOs, is rebroadcast on the UnX network every Thursday evening, 11 p.m. Pacific time, 2 a.m. Eastern on Friday nights or Friday mornings. Thank you to Race Hobbs and Margie K for your support of this program and doing all the rebroadcasts of these podcasts that you do. I appreciate that. And for everyone who does follow the podcast, wherever you listen to this podcast, please give it a good review, give it a good rating. All of that really helps. And the same thing here on the YouTube platform as well. All right, so let's get right to it and bring on our guest, Ted Peters.
Alan, it's good to be with you. And we in California, we like Pete's coffee. What do you drink there on the East Coast?
Cheers. Well, we have I would say eclectic, but we have a wide array of coffee choices.
All right.
When you go to our counter, there is Cuban coffee, Italian coffee, and it's all various forms of espresso mostly. That's how we roll. Second to that, whatever has the most caffeine.
In your chest.
Oh, what's that?
Espresso puts hair on your chest, as my father would say.
Oh yeah, either that or it was turning 40, but I'm not sure which came first. But Ted, thank you so much for being on here. This is a really fascinating side of this subject. Often we do spend the time to discuss the nuts and bolts here, but the philosophical application of UFO discussion is crucial. We can't just move forward and expect to have disclosure without this discussion. So for you as a theologian, a professor, a writer, as a pastor, where do you start when you think about the UFO enigma and how we incorporate that into our spiritual or psychological lives?
Well, I've noticed that since June and July of 1947,
Mm-hmm.
the media and most UFO investigators want to ask one question: are they real? And of course, that question implies, are they coming to us from outer space? And right down to the present time,
Yeah.
the question hasn't changed. Are they real? Well, I bracket that out a little bit and say, what is the cultural significance? And why is it that what is happening today is exactly the same thing that happened 3/4 of a century ago? As a phenomenon, it doesn't change. And so I spent a little bit of time looking at culture. What's the relationship between the UFO phenomenon and the wider culture? What are the thought processes? And one of the things that sticks out immediately is science. Oh, we've got to have a scientific approach. Are these machines kind of like the machines that we make? Are they spacecraft that ferry people from other planets to here? And are they like our aircraft, or are they different? And the physics. How is it that they can make right angle turns at 2,000 or 3,000 miles per hour? The G forces are would be deadly to a human being. And so we get this array of scientific questions, but I think that underneath those scientific questions, religious questions, Will science and technology save the human race from self-destruction, or will they destroy us? After all, it was science that gave us the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But could an extraterrestrial science save us from nuclear destruction, or beginning in the late 1980s, save us from ecological self-destruction, etc.?
Do you
So
mean physical destruction?
three questions are buried underneath the scientific stuff.
Do you mean physical destruction or societal?
Oh, societal.
Mhm.
I think there were two movies that are authentic to the UFO phenomenon. All the rest are science fiction. The first one was The Day the Earth Stood Still in 1951. And remember, the issue there was, will planet Earth, because of its political rivalries, get into an atomic war in which the human race will be destroyed? And the spaceling, Klaatu in that case, comes to Earth to warn us against self-destruction. Well, that's only 6 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. And so everybody is worried about this. Will the US and the Soviet Union mutually destroy each other or not? Could a more highly advanced science and technology save us from ourselves? That was a big cultural question. And the cult leaders of the 1950s, George Adamski and others, that was the question that drove them, and why people got so fascinated then with this subject.
Do you think that we don't even need extraterrestrials to destroy ourselves? For instance, just like on a very smaller scale, anecdotally, if I am using my phone, spending a lot of time on screens, doing a lot of podcasting or listening to a lot of podcasting and watching TV.
Right.
I honestly, and I was heard another podcaster to discuss this, and I 100% agree. I honestly do feel that if I do too much of that for too prolonged of a period, I feel less smart. I feel that my ability to cognate, to put thoughts together and build a wider scope of thinking is blunted. If I spend more time reading off of screens, using my brain in some other application, I feel more clear-minded. I feel like I'm thinking better. Are we on a trajectory where this technology that we have is not only going to hurt us societally, but actually put us in a predicament where we are unable to intellectually parlay with an extraterrestrial species?
Well, I think you're very insightful there with regard to yourself, and I believe it could be objectively confirmed. There are studies, and undoubtedly you're aware of them, that show that teenagers who spend more time on their cell phones become more stupid. That is to say, they can't handle intellectually quite the number and quality of tasks that the previous generation could. And I wonder about that. There were a couple of philosophers a generation or two ago who tracked reading. What happens? What happened in civilization when reading became available? Well, interiority developed. People would sit by themselves, not in a group, and read a book, and their minds would be thinking. And the whole intellectual climate of the human race grew during the period in which increased numbers of people were reading, and so did minds stretched. I think what might be happening now when we get a social media overload, there's a lot of information going back and forth, but that contemplation, that the mind all by itself with a written text, maybe that's what we're losing, and maybe that's why you feel that way after a long day on the computer screen. Yeah, I feel more stupid than when I had my breakfast this morning.
Oh yeah, yeah, and in sometimes in a more foggy kind of a state. Yes. So, do we need to be intellectually more exercised if we're going to confront an ET presence?
Well, that's the next question. Let me just say I'd never heard of that question before, so let me ponder it. I'm a professor, so I believe in reading, and people grow intellectually when they read great works. And I just love sitting with Plato's Republic and thinking Plato's thoughts are now in my mind. You know what?
Thousands of years ago.
But do we need that in order to connect with an extraterrestrial intelligence or an ultra-terrestrial intelligence? I don't know. There is what I call the ETI myth, and that's this belief that an advanced civilization which has evolved for a longer period of time than ours are so much more intelligent and have achieved so much more in science and technology that we look primitive in comparison. So I'm not sure there'd be a big difference from their point of view as to whether or not we get our information off the cell phone or if we get it from reading a great book. According to the myth, if we're more advanced in science and technology, we'll communicate with them because there's an assumption that scientists and technologists make. It's kind of self-serving. It says, really smart people do science and technology, and stupid people, they're the ones that do poetry and art. Ergo, these really smart extraterrestrials will be like the scientists. And if we were to find an extraterrestrial civilization, find they're really advanced in music or art, would we be disappointed and surprised?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I've never thought about that before.
Yeah.
What if they're just like an extraordinarily colorful and introspective species, and they express themselves in all kinds of ways, abstract and literal or otherwise. Because we always think of the sleek UFO, the clean inside, the sterile approach, and that speaks to, I think, what you study, because I was raised Catholic, right? And one of the things that I still appreciate about, even though I'm not a Catholic anymore, what I still appreciate about it is the expression of the mystery through the music, the stained glass windows, the big arches, those, especially the older buildings, the frankincense and myrrh. That transportive side of it, I think, is really beautiful. But then, if the ETs, as some think, are something kind of spiritual in some nature, or an expression of our higher self, why would they be so clinical? Why not,
Yeah, right. Like our doctors, huh? Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, when I think about Gothic churches and Renaissance churches, the largest number of people that were in them didn't read. And so you walk into the church, and this is true in the Orthodox tradition especially. You're walking into a taste of paradise that also is educational. So in a Gothic church, you start on the left side and you look at the stained glass windows and you follow the Bible all the way around the church.
The story.
So you don't read and you look at the stained glass windows, you know what's in the Bible by the time you walk out of the church. And so they had that great function. And even when people began to read, just the height and the echo of the voices and all of these things gave you a little sense of the transcendent.
Yeah.
And the icons in an Orthodox church are not thought to be art. If you ask a Greek or a Russian Orthodox person, it's not art. They are windows into the transcendence. You look through them, so to speak, to the mystical reality that lies beyond. And one of the great deficits of modern science and technology is there's no beyond anymore. What you see is what you get. And our inner spirit chafes under that. We want more than what we see there.
Yes. Although I would say the likes of Neil deGrasse Tyson does a pretty good job of keeping this sort of excitement of discovery alive, right?
He cheats. He
but
cheats.
How does he cheat? How do you
Here's
see
how
that?
he cheats. Well, he's a student of Carl Sagan, who was a prominent atheist. So on the one hand, we're doing serious science. And the scientists, especially the astronomers, presume that your and my mind is structured rationally so that we can understand things that are far away because they're structured rationally as well. But here's how he cheats. Great distances evoke within us something that's beyond the rational. It's actually the word beyond is it. And so our ancestors, before we had airplanes, thought the sky was holy. Think of the ancient myths of Zeus and Jupiter and Thor and Indra throwing thunderbolts, or the sky god in ancient Egypt. The sky, just because it was so overwhelming, communicated this sense of transcendence. And it was easy then in myths to talk about the overpowering power of the sky. Well, then, a Russian astronaut goes up in a space capsule, says, I look for God up in the heavens, and he ain't there. So, if you're a materialist Marxist, that makes good sense. But right behind this sky is outer space, and outer space gives us all that sense of transcendence.
Yes, exactly.
So Tyson can talk factually about the science, but he's taken advantage of the background music of the distance, the mystery, the transcendent aura that comes with that. And that's what I mean by cheating. That there's no way you can't be filled with a sense of awe because of the grandeur of the cosmos.
Is that the point of UFO or UAPs? Are they sort of some kind of
mediators? They mediate between the ordinary, the quotidian, everyday stuff, and the transcendent. They come from the sky, they go back to the sky.
And do you think that they are serving some other purpose rather than just being scientific scouts?
Oh, I do. They're kind of like Tyson. They're cheating too. On the one hand,
in the reverse,
it looks like a garden variety airplane, right? With no wings, but everything else. But on the other hand, it comes from the sky, goes back to the sky. It could do things that we on Earth cannot do. And think about the perfection thing. In the day the Earth stood still, remember the engineers are over drilling on the surface of the flying saucer. I've tried this diamond drill. I can't even nick it.
Yeah.
My father was an automotive engineer for General Motors, and he said, my dream is to make a door that when it closes so perfectly that you don't see the crack anymore. Well, that's what was in that flying saucer. And when Carl Jung wrote his book on flying saucers in 1959, he said the roundness and all these other connotations connote perfection for us. That is to say, a science and engineering that is so far beyond that it connotes perfection. we want perfection. It's kind of the ideal, that
The
hangs
yeah,
above us, and
the
so that's a
divine.
symbolic power. Regardless of the objective reality of UFOs, and I think they're objective. I don't mean to fold everything into the human psyche, but I think we want to project onto them maybe far more than is there. There was a cartoon that I saw some years ago. There was an alien who was riding a tricycle and fell over on it. And the other alien says something, and they thought we were perfect.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up a good point too. I mean,
Yeah.
are we over applying our desire for perfection because it hasn't always been that way in so many mythologies and religions around the world? The gods are imperfect. I mean, look at
They
the
are.
Greek gods; they're a mess.
In most myths, the
Yeah,
gods are imperfect, not perfect, right?
and
They might be
yet,
strong, but
right?
they're not perfect. Zeus was powerful, but he was not moral.
No, Saturn is eating people. I mean, it's not like it's not. It's actually quite gory sometimes.
Yeah,
So to me, I don't know if we need that. Do you think we need that as people? That we need that higher
yeah, I do.
something? You do, because
I do.
I'm definitely uh, agnostic, atheist.
Yeah,
In that category. I personally, just my experience. I don't personally need like a symbol, that I need to follow. That
yeah.
doesn't mean on the unconscious level there isn't something there. And maybe that's why I follow UFOs. Maybe that's why I'm interested in UFOs. Maybe it does serve
hmm
that purpose at an
hmm
unconscious level.
Well, even apart from the religious valence, it is an interesting topic.
Mm,
And it does connect with our everyday experience, and then it expands it
yeah.
in exciting ways. And we have experienced in our society over the last 2 centuries
Hmm.
enormous advance in science and technology. And so it looks like UFOs are one more step.
Right. Right. Right.
And so, even apart from religious symbolism, there's no doubt we're going to be concerned about the phenomenon. Nevertheless, as a
Yeah.
theologian, I'll say, Alan, the reason you have these feelings within you that want to look beyond, that's
Hmm.
the telephone. God is trying to ring your number.
Well, uh, he's gonna have to call collect because people don't even call collect anymore, do they?
No, they don't.
Right. I'm dating myself. Uh, I think that we all do need something to strive for sure.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, we can either put that on ourselves, or we can look to other people that inspire us, or look to symbols and historical figures and what have you. Do you think that these UFOs have literally abducted people, and have shared, passed on to them information that is necessary for us to hear? Or are those people hearing what they think they need to hear?
Um, I check it out the reality question there. So I didn't interview Betty and Barney Hill, but I'll bet you that Benjamin Simon, who did,
Mhm.
I bet he heard what they really thought. Now, I did interview Charlie Hickson, that I gather you've discussed here,
Pascagoula, yeah. Yeah.
Mississippi
Mhm.
abductee on October 11th, 1973. And when I interviewed him, I had a tape recorder. The whole interview, got all
Yeah.
the data, right? And I took it to a detective agency in New Orleans, and they ran a psychological stress evaluator, which is a pretty good form of lie detector. So then I interviewed the detective. He said, "Well, I have to tell you that on everything that Charlie said regarding the details of the abduction, he honestly believes that he's telling you the truth."
Mm.
I said, "Well, did you discover any lies?" "Yeah, one."
Oh.
And Charlie had said towards the end that he knew they were coming back for him
Mhm.
and that they would pick him up and they were going to take him to live on another world. And on that one, we got a stress reaction. So I
Now,
surmised that he was planning on going to this other world, but not taking his wife with him, and that's probably what caused the nervous.
maybe that's what. Yeah, 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 yeah. Or could it be that it wasn't fraudulent, but more of a wish, a hope?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I don't think it was a lie. I think he
Yeah.
was just speculating and had a little tension, and that's what registered there. So my point here is that I think for the experiencer, in many
Hmm.
cases, if they firmly believe it
Hmm.
and they're not lying, then I think we have to take it really seriously. But then we want to sort through, getting back to your question. Well, what was objective and what were they projecting
Yeah.
onto it? And I think in the cases of Betty Barney Hill and Charlie Hickson, they're not really contactees. They just have this extraordinary experience. But if you look at contactees such as George Adamski or those who are far more complex, well, we've got this message. We've got to stop our nuclear arms testing. We've got to have world peace. We've got to do
Hmm.
this, that, and the next thing. Otherwise, we're going to self destruct. Well, that's a religious message, a moral message, and we all want to hear it.
Hmm.
The last thing we want to do is to have our president say, "Hey, we're going to go to war tomorrow." We
Sure.
don't want to hear that kind of thing. We want to hear just the opposite. And then I did notice how right up through the 1980s, when people did get a message, it was to stop nuclear arms testing. And then after the ecological crisis, after the Reagan administration, suddenly, oh, they want us to protect our environment. The Ariel school children in 1994, for example,
Hmm.
they want us to take care of the environment so we don't pollute ourselves to death. And so, is it coincidental that the aliens have a message that sort of fits the culture of the epoch? Or maybe the aliens watch our news and they tailor make their message to fit what Fox News just told them the day before. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, or they felt they accomplished their first mission, which was, hey, let's focus on the nuclear problem,
Well,
right?
that's a good thought. Sure, we had
And yeah,
time to it worked.
it worked. Now let's try the environmental thing, which is
Right.
not really working. What kind of working, but
Yeah. Right. Right.
yeah. Um, I have to ask you. So again, I consider myself agnostic. That doesn't mean I'm not open to all kinds of spiritual
Mhm.
ideas. We discussed
Sure.
that, but I do often wonder: are we in a kind of a simulation? Whether that means you know some parallel to like a computer, or that just the fundamentals of the universe it created a like this kind of reality where we're just like these iterations of reality, and we're kind of just part of this software, this game
Right.
in a
Right.
sense. And does that could that fit with your own religious take on things?
Well, in your sensing that and
Mhm.
considering that hypothesis, who's on the other end? Who's the one that designed the software that you and I are?
I think that's an unanswerable question at this
Yeah.
point. So my question first is like, it's almost like asking, is where is heaven or where is hell, right? Like, if we can find those places, then we know,
It is. It's a
something else, right?
parallel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I were maybe a Hindu or a Dharma in the Dharma tradition, where we think, or the Gnostic tradition, this reality is less real than the other one.
Yeah.
Um, then I would say, okay. Well, what's on the other side that's more real than this? Well, it's the people who design the software of which you and I are characters
Hmm.
in it. Um, yeah, that's a kind of parallel. Parallel. It doesn't sound religious, but it fits the structure of some classic religious metaphysics. I do think that God is more real than the creation, and
Hmm.
Muslims and Jews and Christians are usually going to say something to that effect. But that doesn't mean that the course of historical events, either in nature or in human society, are not real with some uh, perduring significance. I really think it is real. And as a Christian, because Jesus Christ becomes a part of history,
Yeah.
history is real. History belongs to God's life and God's experience in that. So, I let me just say, of the various hypotheses, the one you just gave is probably one that I don't really take seriously.
Mm, okay.
The ultra terrestrial, or double universe or triple universe
Hmm.
theory, which you can find amongst people who know their physics pretty well, I think is probably, I would say, a little more realistic, maybe, than the idea that we're in a simulation. Probably.
Okay. And would that be a problem with your understanding of the divine if there's multiple parallel
It
universes?
would. It would. And by the way, I have a colleague who's a physicist, and we actually argue about this quite
Hmm.
a bit. I do think that Big Bang cosmology, where you have an onset, a beginning, you have an expanding universe in which things continue to be created. I find that very compatible with the Bible. But when you get to Stephen Hawking and other physicists talking about the multiverse,
Hmm.
that every universe is a closed causal system, and we just happen to be in the one in which life could evolve. But there are these parallel universes, each of which has its own distinct history because there's nothing that happens by accident. I find that motivated by atheism, and that it's not scientific. However, I want to say some really smart people that I've talked with, such as I'm trying to think of his name now, Lord, at any rate, in
Auerbach, Lord Auerbach, Lloyd Auerbach, is that it? No.
now the different one. I'll think of it in a minute. Who is a physicist who holds this view.
Ah.
I had a chance to talk to him. Oh no, he says there's good physical evidence
Hmm.
for multiverse theory, and it was beyond my understanding, so I didn't quite get it. Let me just say it would bother me, but it doesn't bother other people as much as it would bother me, and so. At any rate, be that as it may, J. Allen Hynek and um, back in the 70s, was looking at the multidimensional theory, which is a version of the multiverse
Hmm.
theory, thinking that maybe UFOs are coming to us from a parallel universe. Um, Let me just say that there's a certain rationale for that. I find it violates Occam's razor. There are too many extra assumptions there that makes the extraterrestrial hypothesis seem a lot simpler. Jacques Vallée was the one I was trying to think of. Both Jacques Vallée and J. Allen Hynek had considered that, and that theory is still around. I think it's okay to consider it. I think that's more realistic than the simulation theory.
Some people think that these UFO or UAP are literally, or at least some of them are literally of a like spiritual origin, meaning it's like angels or demons or like the fight between good and evil in the
Yeah.
skies. And what's your take on that?
Well, how many versions of this do you recognize? I'm aware of the demon theory, for example, but
Mhm.
what are you thinking about when you pose it? You've got any examples?
Sure. Well, sometimes when people look in the skies and they're using their FLIR goggles or whatever, they're seeing what appear to be kind of like almost like a battle of
Oh, yeah,
UFOs,
right,
this sort of thing. And then there's those who are think that UFOs are all just deceivers,
right, right.
working for Satan here to deceive us. And there's a lot of creative uh,
Yeah.
ideas about what it could be.
Well, with regard to a kind of spiritual understanding, let me just say, I have members of my family and friends that hold that view and
Mm.
will actually go out on a mountaintop in the middle of the night and have a psychic connection.
So they think in the more benevolent terms of it.
Yes, they
Okay.
do.
Mhm.
Not demonic. It's
Right.
benevolent, and so let me just say I'm somewhat familiar with that one.
Mhm.
When it comes to the demon theory, I am categorically opposed to that for a number of reasons.
Mm.
Just in general, UFO experiencers over the last three quarters of a century don't report that. If anything, they're benign. More than that, frequently they're benevolent.
Mhm.
Um, I have to say that I thoroughly investigated one trail into the demonic theory, and it seemed to have been spawned in the 1970s by some fundamentalist creationists. And here's what they said when I finally got them to sit down and talk to me, about why do you think that the flying saucers are demonic?
Mhm.
All right, here's what they said. Many people believe in the theory of evolution, and they believe that on another planet, another civilization has evolved more highly than we have on Earth, and
Mhm.
they have achieved higher levels of science and technology. And so they come to Earth and they show us these bright, shiny, highly evolved technological devices. Satan is doing that. Now, why would Satan do that? Because Satan wants to tempt us to believe in evolution.
Mm.
I mean, I just fell off my chair, that Satan would go to that length to get us to believe in evolution. And I thought, again, this violates Occam's razor. Just too many ifs, ifs, and ifs. And
Right.
at any rate, this demon theory was an anti-evolution theory, and Satan was using flying saucers to tempt us. I just felt that was so preposterous that I couldn't give it any intellectual credibility.
Mm.
Now, I do want to say that I've run into some demon theorists here and there
Mhm.
who don't seem to have that particular argument, but I'm not confident that I understand them well enough to be able to say, hey, this is a good argument or that's a bad argument. But I want to say, up until this point, I've not heard one good argument as to why we ought to think flying saucers might be demonic. I've heard some really bad ones.
Yeah, obviously, if the devil was able to create such things, such physical manifestations, there'll be
Yeah.
plenty of other more convincing ways for him to trick people.
Mhm.
Have you spoken to demonologists or, especially Catholics in particular, that do believe that demons are real, and do and do any of them think that there's any kind of technological aspect to it?
Yes, I have talked to. I got very interested. I wrote a book on sin one time, and I
Mhm.
studied evil, Satanism, exorcism, and these kinds of things. And I did have a chance to talk with exorcists in great detail about demonic possession, etc. And my answer is, on the basis of that, no, there was
Mm.
nothing technological, scientific, of any sort that comes into play there. And even though I didn't ask them about flying saucers, maybe now I should have. Let me just say, it never came up.
So if it was something of import, it would have probably
They
come
would
up
have
during
noticed.
conversation, because you wrote the book God UFOs, or wait, UFOs God's
UFOs,
chariots,
God's chariots. Yeah.
question mark, right?
Question mark. Yeah.
So if there's anyone to talk to about that, it would certainly be you. Have you talked to other people in the field of ufology that are interested in the spiritual side as well?
Oh, well, first of all, on the demon side, the answer is yes. There's a view that I don't know how to adjudicate right now
Mm-hmm.
by some of the best ufologists who are following the disclosure controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the view. Already in the 1950s, when Project Blue Book engaged in the debunking of people who were making reports, there was in the Pentagon some evangelical Christians who believed that if the culture, the wider society, would think that we're being visited from outer space,
Mm-hmm.
that this would challenge or destroy their faith. And so they supported the whole debunking enterprise right down to the present day.
Mm-hmm.
So that means every generation we replace the old evangelical Christians with the new ones, with the new ones, with the new ones, who continue to hold that position.
Wait, can I just pause you there for a second? So are you saying that, I think maybe you're referring to Immaculate Constellation, the people behind in the deep state that are religious, and they think that it's a spiritual
Let me
thing?
just say, I don't know that term, but I think I'm talking about the same thing you are.
Okay. So
Yeah.
are you saying they kind of infiltrated the
Well, let me just say this is a view that I find
Mm-hmm.
amongst people who know a lot.
Okay.
Let me just say I find it too difficult to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And in Elizondo's new book, he only mentions one person that he found in the Pentagon who thinks this way. And so I have a hard time believing that it's a powerful influence.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean there isn't that there isn't some evidence that some people think this way, but that enough people would think that way that it would become a influence government policy, I doubt. Now, maybe you know more about this than I do, but let me just say I'm doubting it, even though I've heard people say it who take it really seriously. Do you have any thoughts about what I'm saying and whether it's serious or not serious?
Well, over the years, you meet a lot of people who have, supposedly have, insiders
Yeah,
that have shared information with them, and that's something that has come up. So when Luis Zondo in his book Imminent mentioned this,
he did.
there was also the implication that there were others, not just the one person that he spoke
Right,
for.
right.
Now, I just think what you said kind of got me thinking. Maybe others have talked about this. I haven't heard about it, but it may not have to be an official government policy. But if you have a loose affiliation of people in the government, particularly on
Right.
the DoD side of things, if they're having their own internal conversation decades ago and said, "What can we do? Because we are religious and this is what we believe. We think this is
Right, right.
evil." Maybe they just on their own independently organize to start disseminating this information, because to churches, literally, and spread that kind of fear among religious people, so that it gets passed down and passed down and passed down.
What
Because
you're saying is plausible. At
Mhm.
some point, we would see evidence of it, and I'm not saying the evidence isn't there, but keep
You
talking
would
about
want evidence, yeah,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, because, and we know for a fact that government agents have fed misinformation to MUFON
Of course.
members and
Right.
ufologists across the board, or people who are interested in UFOs. But that was more official policy, and we know that.
Right.
Whereas
That's
this
what I
would
call the
be,
debunking. Yeah.
Yeah, this one would be off the book. So how do you find evidence for that? You know?
Right, right, right.
What is the most fascinating aspect of all this for you? I mean, you've been looking at this for decades.
Well, I love the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and I'm glad that it's at the heart and center. And I recognize that there are other alternative explanations because, like so many, I just hope they're there. I hope someday we're going to meet them. And I hope they're the way George Adamski describes them. I hope they're really great. And I hope they're
Yeah.
smart. And I hope they're advanced in science and technology, all of these sorts of things. But I have to qualify all of that by noting that we still don't have proof one way or the other, and we keep going over and over the same experiences and data and information and hypotheses again and again, that maybe a great novelist or
Yeah.
historian might say, well, this is a human phenomenon, and this just happens to be our version of it.
Right.
You know, Jacques Vallée thinks that that's a possibility. Carl Jung certainly thought that was a possibility. I would hate to give up the objective side of it and say, "Oh, I still hope there's something there." So I'm part of the phenomenon that I study.
Well, I think that the argument for that there's something there is all the paper trail, all the whistle
Yeah.
blowers and witnesses have worked in the government, have seen physical craft, and the credibility of them, depends on who you're talking to, is pretty solid, especially in recent days. I mean, someone like David Grush, now he didn't see anything himself,
Right.
um, but we've had other whistleblowers in the past come out,
Right.
and but nothing happens. They just say, "I was there, I saw something."
That's right.
Right?
We've had that decade after decade.
Yep.
People like David. I don't know him personally, by the way,
Mhm.
and nothing ever happens. And
Right.
then a decade goes by, and then we do it all over again.
Yes, but I will say this in defense of the yes, we're looking at these cases over and over again, but we are getting new data. We have new technology, so
Right.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
But if you draw the parallel between, let's say, an unsolved murder,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we're still looking at the Jack the Ripper,
Right.
hoping to
Yeah.
solve that. But it does happen on occasion where a murder that was committed decades later, they'll
Gets
solve
solved.
it,
Yep.
right? So if this is a phenomena that is derived, originating from a consciousness separate than us,
Right. Right.
with its own agenda, obviously
Right.
aware of what we are capable of.
That's right.
If
Yeah.
it's a cat and mouse game, we just have to keep at it until we finally get
Well,
it.
I'm like you, Alan. I want to keep at it.
Yeah. Are you do you ever plan up on following up with another book to UFOs
I
God's
might
Chariot?
revise mine because I am continually persuaded that my
Mhm.
models of interpretation that I have there continue to get reinforced with every decade that goes by.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm on target. When my first edition, by the way, came out in the 1970s, and I had just met the two, Applewhite and Nettles, and then I had to revise it after they committed suicide, and then try to interpret what all that was about. So the book that you know is actually the second edition, but I can imagine now, since 2017 and
Mhm.
the new influx of enthusiastic scientists who are going to set up experiments and are going to do large data collection and
Oh yeah.
AI computer analysis, that I think that this is a period of time in which deserves its own attention, and I'm hoping that the enthusiasm amongst our scientists might lead to something. It might not lead to something we predicted, but it certainly could lead to something of value. So if I do something, I think what I would do is maybe revise that book in light of the contemporary discussion.
Well, I know you don't like this paradigm, but one thing I do wonder is if indeed the government are aware of UFOs, hypothetically, if the UFO, if we speak to it in that term, if the UFO leads, if it's a string that you pull on that leads to the revelation that we are in a simulation, wouldn't the government want at all costs to cover that up?
Oh,
Wouldn't anyone
let
be
me ask
deathly
you
afraid? Yeah.
why you would suppose that. First of all, you got two steps. One is we're in a simulation. Step number two, the
Mm-hmm.
government has discovered it and can prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Step number three, why would they want to keep that a secret? I mean, can you think of a reason why the government would want to keep that a secret
I
rather
think
than?
because you would have like a lot of millions and millions of people having total psychotic
Oh,
breakdowns. Like,
okay,
I
all
think
right,
because if people question
yeah,
reality itself,
all right,
um, for those who have experienced psychedelics, it could be a beautiful experience, but it
yeah,
could also be a terrifying experience
yeah, right,
as
right,
well.
right.
Because all of a sudden your perception of reality is just shook. And I don't know if en masse the world could handle that if it were revealed en masse,
Hmm.
you know?
All right, now let me ask you this: what
Mhm,
we know about simulations is relatively recent in the history of computing.
mhm.
The UFO phenomenon begins before we have computers. So, are you disconnecting the simulation from the UFO phenomenon as you raise this?
No,
No.
nope. Uh,
Or
what
we would retrospect. Oh, I think so. We would look back and say, "Oh, we've been in a simulation all along." Okay, all right, all right.
yes. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Um, today, at least. Um,
Well, with coffee, we ought to
uh,
be able to speculate, right?
yeah, oh, exactly, yeah, and the more coffee we drink, the more we speculate. So here's a question for you. So can religious people and atheists, understand the phenomena in a shared context? So let's just say extraterrestrials come down, they're having a conversation with us. Uh, is there, how do we parlay? Because as a society, we want to have a kind of a common voice. So how did the religious people and the secular people communicate
Well,
together with this entity?
I would think that anything that is genuinely scientific, religious
Hmm.
people and atheistic people could share without any problems.
Yeah.
As long as you, one thing about science, it has strict rules of what counts as evidence and all of that kind of thing. And I would think it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, as long as
Hmm.
you play that game. Now, the skeptics, I don't know if you read the Skeptical Inquirer or not, but you get a lot of scientists in there who want to say science is the only way of understanding reality. So all those people who believe in UFOs are religious kooks.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's a form of reductionism. I would think that the humanities person is going to say, well, wait a minute, before you write them off as religious kooks, they're expressing something that's going on in the human psyche,
Yeah.
and the history of human self understanding that's worth paying attention to. Um, and I think religious people probably ought to feel at home with all of that too, unless they're a little on the touchy side.
Hmm.
By the way, I was going to mentioning a couple of these organizations that I've recently joined that have formed after the 2017 New York Times article. In particular, the Society for UAP Studies, but also the Scientific Coalition for UAP. recognize that we really need high quality scientific investigation.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian. The science is going to be the same for everybody. But then when you turn to culture,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's where we have an investment, and but I think more and more people are recognizing we got to turn to culture. We got to understand the interaction of this phenomenon, which is unique.
Yeah.
In terms of culture, and there we're going to need religious people to make their own contribution that you can't get from science or others in order to round it out and be holistic about it. So I'm really happy these days in ways that I wasn't 20 years ago. That you can have a partnership between the scientists, whether they're atheistic or not, and deal with these the cultural dimensions of the UFO phenomenon. Because the science didn't solve it 50 years ago. It couldn't.
Well, it was also, it had its hands tied. I mean, just look at the Condon report.
Oh, why? Yes.
There were scientific magazines that criticized it.
Oh, yeah.
And yet it did the job, right? It put it
Right.
back into the closet. If you were a legitimate scientist, academia, and you wanted grants, you did not.
Oh, you're right. From a certain point of view, the Condon report solved it. It was over.
Yes, it put us back decades. For
Stay
sure.
over, did it?
Yeah, it's kind of like
Right.
the Schedule 1ing of psychedelic studies. They prevented that, because they were so afraid of where it would lead
Right.
psychologically for us as a society.
Yeah.
That they stifled decades of research and put us way behind. And now we're having research that's revealing how effective it can be clinically used towards PTSD and dealing with trauma. So, and I see it similarly, because I feel like it was a fear. It was a fear of, like, we can't let the people know.
Oh, all right.
Terence McKenna, you're probably familiar, or maybe not, but Terence McKenna was a kind of a philosopher, if you will, on psychedelics.
Okay.
And he and his brother were in the jungle, and they had this vision of a UFO while they were on mushrooms.
Oh, no, I didn't know that. Go ahead.
And other people have similar experiences, and he didn't see it as a literal nuts and bolts UFO. Right. He saw it as a kind of a mystical experience.
Right.
And it's interesting. I wonder if there is an intersection there.
Well, I don't know anything about psychedelics, but I could imagine that you have cultural tropes and they would appear in a vision. If you're going to see something in a vision and you're going to recognize it, then you must have picked it up somewhere ahead of time.
Sure.
Yeah. So I haven't ever seen a UFO, but I'll recognize it when I see it because I've seen so many pictures.
That's true. You definitely will. Ted, I can't believe that's it. That flew right by.
Well, it's so much fun chatting with you. And it's a mystery, but we know enough about it to get gripped by it, but not enough to solve it and go on to other things.
Right. Yeah, true enough. And that's why we'll keep getting at it. And if you want to keep up with what Ted's doing, please go check out Ted Peters' website, tedstimelytake.com. If you could leave us with one thought, anything at all, what would it be?
Keep asking honest questions.
All right, there you have it. Thanks so much, Ted. It was great to see
you
again.
All the best, Alan.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Take care. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. If you are a fan of this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts down below. If you're listening to this podcast on a podcast platform, please rate and review. All that really helps us continue to grow. A special thanks to Ray Hobbs and Margie K at the Unnext Network. And if you want show updates, please follow me on Instagram at Coffee and UFOs podcast. Until next time, everyone, peace and love, and live in the mystery.
It's good to be an earthling. I wish more of us would think of ourselves that way.
And I don't have a problem with skeptics. It's debunkers that are on some other level that I don't understand.
Well, if there's another thing.
Essentially an inference of a change in local gravity.
Saucer-shaped craft, and they're hovering over the water.
Blue Book Special Report 14. The better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable.